Welcome back, everybody. I'm Shannon. This is Unique Arts, and we have a special guest today, Brother Cornick. This is a church university, so we call you everybody brother. Professor Cornick, I guess I could say. He's gonna pretty much take us through some works of film. I know I'm not really as acquainted with film as I would like to be, but Brother Cornick is. It seems like it's pretty much your passion, essentially. Mm-hmm. You have a couple books published on it, or is it just a book?
I have my thesis that's a book on film, history of modern film censorship, and then I published an article on that as well.
Okay, yeah. I know that you're acquainted with pretty much every facet of art history, pretty much, but would you say film's like your favorite, or if you could say that, I guess?
I would say film to me is kind of the culmination of all the arts that I like to study, and it's dealing mostly with contemporary culture. So
okay, yeah. I mean, it's uniquely modern.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, compared to the other fine art mediums. So I mean, yeah, I guess that makes sense, and I think that's what makes it kind of dynamic too. Is, but at the same time, it's also, maybe this is a little off topic, but film I feel like is largely used, or at least largely thought of as entertainment. And so I think at least today, lots of people don't think of it as art, but I would definitely think it is.
Yeah.
So.
This is an old debate in cinema, actually right back to the beginning of the silent period. There's an author, a film theorist named Rudolf Arnheim, and he published a book called Film als Kunst, so film as art, and it was kind of the landmark publication on whether film was an art. And there's a lot of people who disagree with it and argue back and forth with some of the approaches that he takes, but it still holds true. Of course, he was dealing with just silent film at the time, but actually I think it strengthens his argument. Once sound's introduced, it becomes a little bit more dynamic, and his theory has to be adapted. But from the very beginning, film theorists and historians have been debating over whether film is a commercial enterprise or if it's a fine art.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of the same with photography.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still, I think, that conflict going on.
Yeah, if we look at Thomas Edison and the Lumiere brothers, who really created the commercial aspect of viewing films or public exhibition of films, they started off as what we would call documentary, actualities, filming and photographing things that were everyday life, and that was the novelty. But that wore off very quickly. Mm-hmm. And so the desire to create some kind of narrative exposition on film is something that was experimented just within the first decade of cinema. And that's where we are now. I mean, we still have documentary films, and they're quite popular. I would say, in a way, they've become more mainstream than they have in the past, and probably as a result of the streaming services like Netflix and Amazon that produce some very popular documentaries. But it's still the bread and butter is the narrative, live action and animation that we watch. So.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think is interesting about film is, and I see a distinction between film and theater, and I think some people don't quite understand that distinction, that theater is what we call a mediated art. Theater is one of many possible interpretations of a written piece, right? So we have a playwright who writes a script, or a playwright, a poet is what Aristotle called them. Mm-hmm. And they would write a script with acts and scenes and all that put together. And then that could be interpreted by the director. I mean, obviously, when we perform a Shakespeare today, we don't know exactly how Shakespeare would have directed it or how everything would unfold. Some playwrights will give us more direction than others in that script, but it's largely left up to the interpretation of the director. And we see the same thing in mediated arts with music. A composer like Beethoven or Mozart will write a composition, but it really depends on the conductor and the performers on how it will actually be heard. So it can always change. And if you were to go watch a play, say 5 days of the week, every performance is going to be slightly unique, depending on who's acting, and even the same actors are going to perform slightly different. So that's one thing to keep in mind about a mediated performance art, whereas film is the opposite of that. Film is what we call an unmediated art. It means there is no mediation. Yes, you begin with a script, but once that film has been photographed and edited and finalized, it never changes.
Yeah.
So 100 years later, we watch the same exact film. Yes, there may be degradation in what it was photographed on, the film itself, or maybe how we restored it or put sound or music to accompany it. But the essential element of that narrative exposition stays exactly the same. So in that sense, it's very unique, and the way we interact with film is different. So there's no physical presence that we have. And the other quality about film that's unique from the performing arts is you get to manipulate space and time. So if I go and watch a play in a theater, I am limited as an actor, director, performer, or an audience member to that particular location for that same amount of time. If they change the set or we have new actors come on, I as an audience member have to wait the same amount of time as it takes for them to accomplish what they're trying to do. So in that sense, we're locked into the same space-time continuum. And that's why I see film as truly the modern art. When we think about modernism and the impact of someone like Albert Einstein, which doesn't get enough attention on how modernists viewed art in this relative sense of fracture of time and space. It's really cinema that picks up on that, because I can transport you from any location in the world almost instantaneously, and you as a viewer, you don't have to wait for that. It's because it's unmediated, it's there, it's actual, and we can cut out all the time and the effort that it takes to produce that for the audience. So.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so that's definitely a good point, an obvious point, but I don't think about it ever.
Yeah.
And maybe more so today with like the internet, and we can see all these other things. Like I could see a painting that's in Florence or whatever if I want to, but it's obviously not the same. But the film essentially will be the same regardless of. So.
Yeah, that distance, that's an excellent point. The distance between the participant and the artwork or art object is different. There's a mediation there, but film is so unmediated. You don't have to have that interpretation. You can watch it. Now it may vary, whether we see it in a theater projected on the screen or you watch it on your handheld device.
Yeah.
So that experience, which I think is really going back to the Edison-Lumiere brothers debate. Edison's original equipment only allowed one viewer at a time, and you paid and you'd look through his kinetoscope and you would watch that, and that was it. Lumiere brothers created the first public exhibition where we projected the image on the screen and you saw it as a group, a communal group. And that individual experience kind of disappeared for most of film's history. And we've known it as going to the movie theater, or even if we watched at home, it was a group gathering. Now that's changed quite a bit. We see more and more people watching in isolation on devices. So technology has taken us back to Edison's first approach. And because of the pandemic, COVID, we've seen the shuttering of many of these theaters. And I don't know if they'll ever come back, probably not to the same level they were. And we see just the individual and their interaction with a film work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes it more personable in a way that we often ignored, largely because theaters were just the thing you did. If you were to see a movie, you go to the theater, and it's a different experience. And I would say maybe they're both worthwhile in their own way. Because I mean, I still like going to the drive-in. So I mean, I hope they're around to some degree. But I mean, yeah, that's a interesting point.
Yeah, I think that's the variety is what is nice today. I think we live in the best time to enjoy film because we have preserved films from a century ago, and we can watch them that someone 50 years ago wouldn't have access to. We can restore them to their original beauty of what they would have looked like projected on screen, that original silver nitrate film. And we can watch alone, we can watch in theaters, we can watch in groups or drive-in, anything like that. So I think we live in the best time because we have access to all of that on demand, almost instantaneously. I think one of the things though we miss not having the theatrical experience is the communal gathering. And I think we've lost that in a large degree in many respects in our society. We don't see a lot of people attending community parades or community gatherings. They've kind of disappeared over the last half century. And we see that with cinema, and I think that's a shame because we run the International Cinema here on campus. And part of the reason I require my students to attend that is I want them to see what it's like to be exposed to a film in a group gathering, especially from another culture that they may not be as familiar with. Because I think it helps you react in a way, and your interpretation of the film in a way that you never would have had you not been next to someone you don't know. When you have a communal laugh or a communal sadness or a communal fear, there's an element that it's energetic, it's palpable. We get that in theater, we get that in live performances of music, but film, we've moved quite a bit away from that. Mm-hmm. So there's trade-offs. I mean, you don't have someone's phone going off and lights and noise of candy wrappers and popcorn bags, but there is something to be said of a communal experience. It's like if you go to an art museum and you wander around with a group of people and you're admiring a painting or a sculpture, and you interact with how others interact. So there's a dynamic there that I think is important.
Kind of to touch on, especially what you said about like the international cinema, I think that film, when it's foreign, I guess we say foreign at least, maybe American. Do they consider American films foreign? I don't know. But like foreign film, it's definitely more, I don't know, it seems more exotic than like a foreign artwork in a way. Like maybe not so much with like tribal masks and stuff like that. But if I've never been to Italy, but I'm like Michelangelo's David doesn't seem foreign to me. Or even like the futurist stuff, like doesn't really seem foreign to me, even though it's by these Italian people who come from a rather different culture than mine. Mm-hmm. But if I see an Italian movie, it's more of a slap in the face that it's not my culture. So I don't know, like.
Yeah, and I think that's because it's not a static art like we see with sculpture or painting where it just stays the same the entire viewing experience. Film, you're moving through a time continuum from a beginning to end. So your interpretation, you're going to have idiomatic expressions, you're going to have cultural allusions to history and to other parts of their culture, which is why I think it's so important to see foreign films made outside of your particular culture. I remember when I showed a French film here, and one of the French faculty, she was watching, and all the parts that were supposed to be funny, nobody laughed except for she and her family because she was from France. And all the parts that were not supposed to be funny, all the Americans laughed. So they didn't catch those cues. So I think it's important, the more exposure you have, the more you understand that culture, the more you can appreciate their way of telling a story visually. And that, I think, is one important thing to mention is subtitles. Like you said, if you're from another country, United States, one of the biggest exporters in the world, they in India, their film industries, so they probably don't view it as foreign in the sense because it's so part of popular culture. But when we watch a film, we often see it as subtitled. It's pretty rare that you find one that's in English for us, unless it's from the UK or major English speaking. But it's important to see that it's a different experience reading that, and you don't get the time to visually see what's going on. So that can be a drawback and a turnoff for some people. But if you accustom yourself to it, it's not too bad.
Okay, yeah, that's a fair point, I guess. I mean, I know, at least, I'm not a huge like anime fan. I don't know if you've ever taken time to watch anime.
A little bit, yeah.
But like people always say that, oh, the dubbed isn't the same as the sub. Like if it's dubbed English, but if it's worse than watching just in Japanese, but just having to read subtitles. But if you're not accustomed to it, then lots of people would prefer the dubbed because they feel like they're not getting it because they just have to read it the whole time.
Yeah. So in that sense, I would say an international film is much more akin to opera. You know, we don't all speak German or Italian or French or Russian, so we can go and we can watch the super titles they'll have in English. So it's a similar experience. And part of that experience watching visually is what they call the principle in cinema. The principle of cinema is that no more should be expressed verbally than can be expressed visually. So sometimes I think viewers make the mistake of saying, if I want dialogue, that's what I'm looking for in a film. But cinema is a very visual medium. It's dependent upon what you see and how you interpret those views. So the less you can say, and the more you can say with words, and the more you can say with visuals, the better the film is, in my opinion. And looking through film history, that's the case. If you notice any favorite film of yours, probably the most key moments where there's the greatest dramatic impact or the most powerful part of the film, it's when it's just visuals. There's no dialogue. There may be music underscoring that, but it's visuals. And you'll notice that many of the popular shorts you'll see Pixar produce before films when they exhibit them, they have very little to no dialogue at all. And that's because they have mastered that art, which I think was the benefit of silent film at the beginning. They reached their pinnacle. One of the quotes I wanted to share about that from Kevin Brownlow, whom I met. He's one of the greatest film historians alive today, and I met him at BYU in their archive there. He came to do research. BYU houses the Cecil B. DeMille collection. We have the entire collection of all his works. So he came as he was doing a documentary, and I got to meet him, and he signed my book for me. So his book is called The Parade's Gone By, but he knew many of these silent film directors. In fact, he's responsible for piecing together Abel Gance's, the famous French director's, entire film of Napoleon. So it's almost 4 hours long. It might be close to 5 hours, but they just recently restored it in its condition. It's a masterpiece, and he's the one responsible for that. But he writes about the silent period. One of the quotes he says is that the secret of the silent film lay in its unique ability to conjure up a situation that closely involved the audience, because demands were made on its imagination. The audience responded to suggestion, supplied the missing sounds and voices, and became a creative contributor to the process of projection. Which is one of the keys, I think, about cinema. It's very much not a passive medium if you're doing it right. It's not that's just there to veg and lay back, and that's more entertainment. But if you're looking at cinema as a fine art, and you think of all the other fine arts, it involves a great deal of active participation, moving, viewing, listening with a trained ear, all of those aspects. And so cinema, I think, there was something about the silent film that required you to provide the missing sounds. They showed them visually, the sound. If a car was honking, they would show the car and someone hitting the horn, and they would show sounds, but you supplied the meaning or the aural part of it. So there's something that we miss in that participation that I think is crucial.
That's really interesting. I mean, my wife likes to watch Family Feud. That's pure entertainment, not really film. But I mean, or if there's just like any action film, she throws on any Marvel film. I don't really need to pay attention to it. I kind of just look up from a book I'm reading every now and then, and I'm fine. I feel like I get the experience. But if it's like a film that is like, I guess you could say more of an art piece, like if I want to watch a Capra film, I feel like I have to pay attention to it. I'm not really acquainted with silent films so much, to be honest. I don't know if I've ever watched one, but maybe I should repent of that. But like if it's a Capra film or these ones that I feel like have so much more meaning, I need to be involved. So I feel like I can't read a book as well. I need to just watch it and give it all my attention.
Yeah, it's interesting when I teach students about the difference between film and, say, theater. I put up an excerpt from a script, like by Arthur Miller, Death of a Salesman. It's just packed with dialogue. And then I put up, actually, I use a script from Frank Capra, from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and I show how it's very sparse. Most of it's technical direction, close-up, exterior, short little line, then explanation about where the camera's going to go or what perspective it's going to be photographed from. So it's not a medium that's built on dialogue. That's not its medium. In fact, the world-renowned playwright and screenwriter, David Mamet, he's won awards for Broadway, he's won awards for film. He, in an interview, was asked, so really, theater is about dialogue, film is about pictures. And he said, that's exactly right. If you're going to film, it's not for dialogue, it's for pictures. You look at Shakespeare, I show the end of All's Well That Ends Well. And everything that's happening, Shakespeare's telling us what's happening. He's saying, here's your letter, here's your ring. We know that, but we see it, but we hear it. In film, it's the opposite. We look, and the gestures and the focus our attention on properties or costume or reactions, that tells the story more than anything else. So.
That's an interesting point. I mean, I think maybe that's, like, this might be a little off, but I know that with literature, because it's mostly dialogue, or they're writing it out for you, I feel like maybe that's more easily translatable into theater productions, but sometimes it can be really hard for film.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least, it's not as captivating in its own way. I know everyone says the book's always much better than the movie, and I guess I would usually agree with that. But do you think it's because of that, maybe, or at least that's a part of it?
That's part of it. Well, I actually think film is closer akin to literature in many ways, and that's partly because I see in literature the demands that are made upon an imagination. You're given words, you're given descriptions, but you have to conjure up what it is that the world looks like. What we call in literature and in film that diegesis, the world in which all these events transpire. It requires you to imagine. Now, film shows it, but a good film still requires you to supply things, supply emotion and meaning and interpretation, which is one of the reasons when I teach about film, I point out that Sergei Eisenstein, one of the great Russian silent film directors, he was most influenced by Charles Dickens and another American filmmaker, D.W. Griffith. Charles Dickens, he points out in one of his film theory books, uses that in Oliver Twist. He cuts back and forth between two scenes to build a sense of tension and heighten the experience. And that he then pulled into cinema. And the Russians in the silent period become known for their masterful editing. But it was D.W. Griffith in the American film system that really influenced mostly film as an art throughout the world because of that translation from literature. And so what did they have to go on in the early days of cinema? They didn't really have the screenwriting that we have today. They just pulled from popular literature, which was romantic literature. And so that's what you see the basis of film, the foundation of their stories.
Okay. I can't think of any recent examples. The first ones that come to mind are Harry Potter, and that's not what I would call romantic literature or anything, but have you read the books, Harry Potter and stuff like that?
Excerpts.
Excerpts?
I would say we still have quite a romantic tradition in film. We like stories that are very emotional and dealing with subject matter of death and sadness and all of these things that would have been popular in the romantic tradition. And I think that's still a holdover from the early days of cinema. We've never really left that.
So you said with Dickens and Sergei
Eisenstein.
Yeah. Okay. Are there certain aspects of, if a film is going to be adapted from a certain book, do you think that there are certain things they have to do to make it just as captivating, essentially? Yeah,
the challenge when I teach a film course, we talk about adaptations. The challenge is you just hit the length. A script for a film usually equates to 1 page to 1 minute. So you can't really have a 300 or 400 page book turned, directly or translated directly into cinema. It doesn't work. So you have to decide what characters can be amalgamated, what characters can be cut, what elements can be pared down to create that wonderful dramatic structure, but still keep it within the time frame. We're not in a place right now where we see a lot of 3 or 4 hour films like they used to. I mean, The Lord of the Rings would be something close to that, but there used to be a lot of films like that. But it's different now. So you have to decide how you pare that down, and then the debate is how close or how faithful are they to the original intent of the book.
So it's like there's not as much like epics out there, and do you think that's partially just because like the audience probably would be falling asleep by the end of it, or?
Yeah, I think the audience, what we call since the MTV generation, fast clips, commercials have followed that same formula. It's very fast, very rapid attention. You mentioned Marvel films, science fiction films like Star Wars. They want fast cuts, action to keep your attention. The Russians would have loved that. The Sergei Eisenstein and Budovkin and others, they loved the rapid montage, and that's where that tradition comes from, even faster than we have today. But I think also there's an economic reason we don't see that. Theaters, if they have a longer film, can have less showings in a day or evening, and so we don't see as many of those, except for films like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, which I think is a great movie.
So if you're a big devotee, you're willing to sit through that.
Yeah.
But most people, for most films, wouldn't.
I guess that makes sense, because I even know people that like say Lord of the Rings is too long, and there's like can't get through it, and I'm like, is there something wrong with you? But I don't know, like, I guess I get it, especially if that's like all that they've been exposed to. Like it's just that quick stuff, and lots of movies today are just like an hour and a half,
Yeah.
And if they go to 2 hours, that's almost odd these days, it feels like.
Yeah, it's like in music, the 3-minute songs, kind of the golden time frame. They're not used to a 30, 45-minute symphony, It's just, it's the time, which is unfortunate, because I think there's a level of patience that has to come and be part of you when you engage with any art form. A philosophical work, you're gonna have to exercise the patience and the ability to wrestle with the text and the material. Novels, film, painting and sculpture. It's really about the time and attention you're willing to devote to it.
Yeah, okay. So maybe we have societal issues we need to talk about, but
I truly believe that cinema, Richard Wagner called the opera the Gesamtkunstwerk, the total work of art. And I see cinema as filling that today. It requires all aspects of the visual elements of art and principles of design. It requires immense technology. I don't think there's a single art form out there, with the exception of maybe large works of architecture, that require more people to be involved. Thousands and thousands of artisans and craftspeople and technology experts to produce a single film, and the amount of money that's put into it. So it really is the true modern art form, and cross-sectional with commercial and popular culture. So everything about it is fascinating, I think, and pulling from all other works of art. So I think it's one of the greatest mediums, and should be studied and understood, and I think people should be more educated on how to improve their viewing experience.
okay.